Welcome to our 5 on 5. Very pleased to be joined today by former U.S. Congressman Greg Walden. Good to see you, sir.
It's really good to see you, too.
I wish we were here under better circumstances, but you're here in town for the loss of a friend.
Yeah, Troy Ferguson, who passed away unexpectedly a couple weeks ago. We had the great opportunity to work together for 16 years in my office here in Medford. Incredible veteran, incredible Rotarian, always put service above self, worked at United Way, just did so much for the Rogue Valley and for veterans especially. And his loss is a tough one, unexpected one. And we should all keep his wife and family in our prayers.
Indeed. So it's been a couple years since you retired, and
yes.
I believe we've had you once. This is the second time since then. So just to brush people up on, you're pretty active in politics still, though obviously not in office. Or are you fully retired now?
Oh no, retirement was overrated. It lasted about 3 weeks, and then so I do some consulting work in Washington on communications issues, spectrum issues. Some on privacy issues, healthcare. I do some work for the community health centers, like La Clinica here, but on their national organization. And so some issues like that. Serve on a couple of advisory boards, and so I keep pretty busy.
Yeah. Okay. And so curious, because obviously a lot's happened in Congress since you left. You may have heard. What are you seeing in Congress since you left that makes you happiest?
Well, in some ways, believe it or not, they're actually working better than they did for a while. Post January 6th and the riot that took place on Capitol Hill, they weren't talking to each other literally. And then with the pandemic, they had no opportunity to physically get together very often. And so those wounds took a long time to heal between the two parties. I think a lot of that now has gotten better, and there's a lot of bipartisan work being done. Generally, the bipartisan work doesn't make big headlines because, you know, it's more the controversial stuff that people are focused on. But if you look at some of the work that they have done, there's work getting done. And so I'm happy for that. I'm sad because the real legislators that are there in both parties, and that's most members of Congress, are pretty frustrated that you got sort of sideshows going on that prevent more legislation from being worked on, and that's frustrating on both sides.
Yeah, is there anything you're seeing in Congress right now, of course, that makes you sad?
Just that, that they seem, it's such a tight majority, if you can even call it that. It's a
Sure.
1 or 2 seat majority in the House. Frankly, the Senate's almost equally split as well, and it's very difficult to move legislation between the two houses right now. It's pretty dysfunctional in many ways, and that makes me sad because I'm a big believer in our democracy, in the ability to come together and bring what mattered for Southern Oregon against what may matter in Portland or
Sure.
Philadelphia or somewhere. Bring people together and try and find solutions, and that is difficult to do right now, harder than I've ever seen it.
All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. Much more with the former congressman in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to our 5 on 5. Again, we're here with former U.S. Representative Greg Walden, congressman for decades, or former congressman, excuse me, I'm used to calling you that. We've done this a few times. For decades, it seemed like Republicans were the hardliners when it came to Russia.
Yep.
Now things are largely the opposite. You know, we don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but it's some in the GOP who opposed aid to Ukraine. Does that worry you really on a macro geopolitical level?
Yeah, I want to give some context around that because I talked to a lot of my former colleagues about this. They really want to get something done on the U.S. border, and their constituents are really pushing them to get something on the U.S. border. And anytime you're doing anything with foreign countries and giving American taxpayer dollars in some form or another to deal with an issue overseas, people at home go, but what about our situation here? And I think there's great frustration that we don't have better security on our own border. So that's a piece of it. In terms of Republicans have voted no. But I also think there are pillars of courage that voted yes. Because I'll tell you what, if you don't stop Putin here in Ukraine now, Moldova is likely next or somewhere else in the Balkans. Now you're into Article 5 NATO treaty obligations. I'd rather have our money paying for weapons being produced here and used over there by the Ukrainians against the Russians than end up in a NATO conflict with Russia where our troops, American troops, are now on the line, and our whole situation changes dramatically then. None of us should want that. So I'd rather stop Putin where he is, and I think a huge majority of the Congress felt that way at both sides. And if you look at the Senate vote, it was much more overwhelming. I think 78 votes overall out of 100. So and I think they had 311 maybe in the House. But yeah, it's troubling.
It never came to a vote. The border bill that Democrats floated, that many Republicans liked, and former President Trump didn't want. It's an election year. Obviously, both sides are digging in. If you were in office, would you have supported that?
You know, I didn't look at it closely, so I'll withhold judgment. I was told, from what I just heard, that it didn't accomplish some of the major goals that H.R. 2 did, which was the House bill, that the Senate wouldn't take up. So we're in this gridlock again. I think we all ought to be able to find common ground that we have a very porous border where bad things are coming across. When you think about the fentanyl that's coming in and killing Americans, and you think of others that have been on the terrorist watch list that we know have entered into the United States, a country that doesn't have control of its border does not have control of its security. So one way or another, we've got to make progress. Well, I'm not there to vote.
We as Americans.
But I know our congressman's very engaged in these issues. Cliff Bent's is doing a great job. And I think we've got to figure that out. And I think that, back to your earlier question about Ukraine, I think that's an issue for Republicans, that one way or another they want real border security and they want to deal with this problem now. And we were on a path to do that, frankly, in the last administration. And this administration came in and basically reversed everything. And now they're even walking back some of what they reversed and going back to some of the Trump administration rules. Because they see it's just not working. So, I mean, we had a real mess on the border. It's very dangerous, and we've got to get it fixed.
You're obviously still very active in politics, though not serving the constituents who are watching right now. Are you formally endorsing anyone for the presidency this year?
You know, the good news about being a private citizen, I can stay out of all of that. But look, I certainly won't be voting for Joe Biden. And I think it's interesting when you look at the polls. Majority of members of both parties say they'd really prefer somebody else as their nominee. I mean, that's been out there in the press, but that's not going to be our choice. And third-party efforts under no labels couldn't produce a candidate. And I saw Chris Christie's interview the other day where he said even if he'd been the nominee, it would have gotten like 10 or 11% maybe. So I think you're going to end up with this choice that a lot of people wish we'd kind of moved on to two new generations, one on both sides.
Well, I'm sorry that your loss of your friend Troy Ferguson brought you here, but we do appreciate you taking the time. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
All right.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.